Welcome to the Growth Enablement Madness podcast, and I'm Jim Ward, your host, CEO of BrainCell, the Growth Enablement Company. I'm absolutely mad about helping businesses grow and scale. And in this podcast, my team and I get a chance to talk shop with industry thought leaders about a variety of growth enablement strategies, stories, and technology trends. I'm happy that you're here, so let's get the growth conversation started. Welcome to Growth Enablement Madness, a podcast where we talk about how people and companies can grow and scale. I'm Jim Ward, your host and CEO of BrainCell. I want to welcome my co-host, Sarah Reed, and our producer, Connor O'Keefe, who's in the background. But we have this guest today who I will say I heard her speak at a recent SKO event, happened to be at the Sugar CRM SKO event. I was really impressed and ran up after her and shook her hand and asked her if she'd be on a podcast with me. And I'm grateful that she accepted the invite. Her name is Sarah Furness. Hi, Sarah.
Hello. Great to be here.
Sarah's an author also, and here's her book, Fly Higher. Great book. I want you to go out to Amazon and pick this up. It's not too bad of a read either. So it's been sitting on my CEO's desk because she's going to enjoy this content very much based on what I heard.
And it's on Audible too. So if you're not good at the physically reading, you can listen to it.
So, Sarah, I know some of the things that really, first of all, is your background. Are you still with the Royal Air Force? Is that still something you do, or is that your background now?
That is my background. I did 21 years, but I left about 2 years ago, and now I give my full attention to doing this, which is speaking and coaching, which I'm sure we're going to delve into.
So, tell me a little bit about that experience and what you actually did in the Air Force.
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined in 2000. You've already heard that my inspiration for this was Top Gun, which I think it's important to be honest about this because, at the time it was seen as a bit of a, I don't know, that wasn't the real reason or the right reason for joining, but actually I think it's fine to be inspired by a film. So I joined with the desire to be a fighter pilot, basically. And I did all right. I did quite well at the training, but it's very hard to get all the way through. So I ended up being kind of selected to go and fly helicopters. And I did that for the best part of 20 years, and it was an absolute riot. And then I got towards the end of my career, your priorities will start to change a little bit. And I got really passionate about kind of how the human brain works and how we are brilliant at getting in our own way, but also how we're brilliant at thriving under pressure when we know how. And that's what prompted the change. And that's why I left and set up my company.
Well, it probably gave you a lot of foundational work that brought you to this new part of your life. And I might share that I have my private pilot's license, and certainly nothing compared to what you've done. Because you're right, Top Gun I heard was your inspiration, and maybe you can talk about some of the challenges that you've gone through in fighting. But fighting, it was you were in. Tell the audience about some of the issues you went through while flying the helicopter.
Yeah, I think that's one of the key things I learned. And like you say, I'm very much using the experiences from the military. But I think we have this idea that we're supposed to be magically brilliant under pressure. And if we don't just ace it, then somehow we failed as a human being. And certainly the first time I crashed and thought I was going to die, I was not magically zen. I was thinking about death. I was thinking about all the wrong things. We'd just flown through some cables that were strung across a valley in Morocco. It was the last thing that we expected to happen. And I think the point is that my brain went to a really unhelpful place. I started catastrophizing. And actually what I needed to be doing in that moment was focusing on flying the aircraft. And as I discovered later on, the science behind that is quite straightforward. You can really only focus on one thing at a time. So if you're focusing on your eulogy, you're not focusing on flying the aircraft.
That's right.
And that's why it's drilled into us when we're going through flying training of fly the aircraft, fly the aircraft, fly the aircraft. So that is very much drilled in. And my instructor, who was a little bit more experienced than me, his instinctive response was to say, fly the aircraft, Sarah. And that's what kind of brought me back into the moment. And it took me years to realize that, but that's actually fundamentally the secret to performing at our best under pressure. It's about where we focus our attention. and just focusing on something in the present. Focusing on, it can often be quite a simple action, but we often overcomplicate it and think we've got to be coming up with some really complex or clever thing. Actually, just do the most important thing in the moment.
Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine flying into wires or cables, and the sound, was it a horrific sound too? And did they snap?
They did, fortunately. Do you know, I don't know if you will have to edit this out. The only thing I heard was what the captain of the aircraft said, and it was a 4-letter word.
No, not that. You can say what it is.
But yeah, he basically went, fuck, like that. And I think that's what I heard more than the canopy shattering. Because then I think you see it before you hear it in a weird way. And suddenly you're just like, wow, I'm flying a convertible helicopter. I've got no windshield in front of me.
Oh my gosh.
But it all just happened so quickly. And interestingly, his instinctive response was to try and turn the aircraft away from the wires. But he turned my side of the aircraft into the wires. And he got quite a lot of grief for that. They said it wasn't very gallant of him.
Hopefully you weren't injured in any way.
No, it was fine. Again, these aircraft are very well engineered. So it's a bit like cars, they crumple in the right place to make sure that you don't get injured. So it's a testament to engineering that we walked away from it.
So that experience that you've gone through becoming a pilot and then going through some scary situations, and I think you had mentioned you were bringing special forces to certain battlegrounds, et cetera. So pretty high energy, high intensity. What have you designed for your business now that helped you get here from there? What does the business look like?
Yeah, so I created this habit.
And it's called Well Be It.
Yeah, the business is called Well Be It, as in rather than so be it, well be it. So you're making an active choice, really, to work with your brain so that your well-being is improved. It started out really more in the well-being space. I discovered mindfulness and I thought it was the best thing in the world. And I was going to go out and teach mindfulness to everyone and I was going to cure everybody of suffering. Basically, that was kind of originally my plan. And then I realized that it's not just enough to kind of be able to smile through difficult times. You've still got to be able to perform. I was working with very high achieving, high performing individuals who are under a lot of pressure. So part of their well-being is, but how do I perform under pressure? And so that's when I realized I could sort of pick all of the best bits of my training, my experiences, and analyze it and go, well, why was I able to get through that? Why was I able to perform? So a kind of combination of understanding the brain through the study of mindfulness and then just lived experience. I came up with the habits method because everybody loves a mnemonic. And habits, we obviously know what habits are, but they stand for healthy automatic behaviors in threatening scenarios. And basically, it's about training your brain to behave in a helpful way when the pressure gets turned up. And this was the method that I came up with that I now teach in workshops, or if you hear me in a speech, then I'm giving you the kind of the highlights of it, really.
So habits is you've come up with that as a acronym?
Yes, I have.
Okay. And you apply that. Can you tell us a little bit of how you apply it in some of your sessions or your one-on-ones? And tell us a little bit about how you go about doing this. Is one-on-one? Is it groups?
Yeah, it's a bit of everything. And it's catered towards the environment. So if you're giving a 45-minute talk, you've got to give people just enough to walk away with that will make a difference tomorrow. So that's why I picked the things that I think you need to know this is going to help you tomorrow. If it's a workshop, I go through the entire habits process. And for every letter of the mnemonic, there is a kind of tool or a strategy. So the first one is getting yourself into the healthy part of the stress curve. So this is something that was really drilled into us as pilots, in that people often say, I thrive under stress, or, healthy stress. Yes, kind of, but we need to understand that there is too much stress. So just stressing people out or just trying to max people out isn't a good way to train people how to operate better under stress. We actually need to train ourselves in optimal positive stress, which is kind of when people think of, when you're in flow, that's usually when you're in positive stress, because it's not really easy, but it's also not too difficult. It's just difficult enough. And this is what the military was really good at doing, was creating those optimal conditions and just pushing you just enough so that you're a bit uncomfortable, but you're not totally freaking out. And that's what we did our training in. And that's what allows you to do your best performance, and then you repeat that and repeat that and repeat that. So you've now got repeated learned behaviors to fall back on when you are totally maxed out. So it's really important to hit the right part of the stress curve. And that's one of the, the bits that I do in preparing companies, preparing individuals, get yourself in the right headspace. And if you are having a really bad day, the right thing might be to walk away until you're feeling more calm and able to approach this task and do it well.
That's interesting. So put it away and put it down, come back. Interesting. Yeah, yeah. So the military really helped you provide this foundation, and you're doing speaking engagements as well, which is where I saw you, and you're coming to the United States, starting to spread the word.
Absolutely. I think the speaking engagements, because I understand that we're also time poor, I love speaking. It's one of my favorite things to do because I can sort of distill what I think is, the one or two or three things that just, if you did this, it will make a difference. And also you're getting the message out to more and more people. So, it's obviously that's one way of doing it. Then you obviously got workshops where you're working with smaller amounts of people and really going into a little bit more detail and being able to troubleshoot. And then, of course, one-to-one coaching, deeper dive even still.
I can't imagine the one-on-one coaching is a one-time event. It's got to be in order to get the learned behavior, is it?
No, absolutely right. Yeah. And, again, there's lots of varying science, some anecdotal, some evidence, but we think it's 3 to 6 months for a habit to become ingrained. So that's generally what I pitch my coaching at is, let's make this a 3 to 6 month engagement and we make sure that those behaviors bed in.
So as you think about your business, I know for us, we have some core values that we live by. And in fact, we analyze our folks against core values. We have a people analyzer. We have something called get it, want it, capacity to do it. When you think about that, what are your core values and how do they, inform your professional life at Well-Be-It and beyond?
Yeah, I love this question. I think it's such an interesting question. And because I'm lucky enough now to be operating globally, and I hope there's more of that. And I'm really keen to do some more work with Americans because, as I've said, I love you guys. You're brilliant to work with.
Why? Why do you love us?
Because that round of applause that I got, Brits just go, yeah, nice one. We're so understated, and it's just so nice for people to go, yeah, it's really,
Okay.
it's good. But no, so, and I think that's the thing is, because we live in this world where we're more and more connected, we are meeting people who have slightly different values. And actually, isn't that wonderful? And I think it's really caused me to challenge how sacred are my values to me? And I'll talk about that in a minute. But also, do they need to be the same values as the other people? Because actually, maybe previous Sarah would have gone, well, I find it, a bit embarrassing when Americans are so warm. And I think, oh, gosh, that's not very British. But actually, I love it. So actually, one of the things I've learned is to be open to other people's values. But, for sure, I think you have your own values. And I think I try to live by them and then sort of radiate them like a beacon of light. And if people like what I'm about, they'll come to me. I'm not kind of chasing after people. They'll like what they see and they think, yeah, I can see that there is a match, not necessarily that they're the same, but they complement each other. I think that's a really nice thing to be able to find.
So if I remember correctly, you do have some core values and some acronyms again.
I do. And they are 4-letter words again.
Yeah.
It's a military hangover. I'm going to blame it. We do like to use coarse language. But yeah, my top value is don't be a dick.
This is what I love about her.
I like that because it means different things to different people, but the core value can be the same, right?
So your name can't be Richard is what you're saying.
Exactly. Yeah. But yeah, so that's my top value is don't be a dick. And then I think my second value is don't become the dick. So there's so many times when I thought, well, you're not behaving very well. So I'm going to show you and I'm going to hold you accountable. And then there's so many times you go, oh, I've overplayed that. And then I've become the dick. So don't be a dick, but also just because someone else is maybe not behaving the way you want them to, it doesn't give you a license to then kind of become the dick. So those are my top two values. And then my third value is if you forget 1 and 2, just say sorry. Don't be beyond kind of taking responsibility. Just say sorry. I think most people will forgive you if you at least apologize.
Sarah, did you have a question? I swear you had a question here somewhere.
I have a few questions. I was just waiting to be able to interject with all your questions, Jim. One that came to mind, though, Sarah, as you were talking about your experience as a combat pilot. This month is International Women's Month, and I always reflect back even when I started in my career and now, and just the presence of women in the workforce. And in my head, I imagine that there probably weren't that many women combat pilots. So what was that experience like? And maybe even in your work now, are you seeing more women in leadership that you're working with? And do you tailor your coaching any differently between women and men?
Yeah, absolutely. I love working. I've had brilliant coaching relationships with women and men. And yes, of course, there are differences. Although I don't know if we can sort of say for sure that they're gender, differences.
Right.
It could just be that one person's Bob and one person's Hillary and they just happen to be different. But for sure. And yes, I was absolutely in the minority. And I'm a really big believer in leveraging our differences as strengths. And I think that there's two things I want to say here. One is that it was very easy to assume that I had it harder because I was in the minority. But one of the things I often will talk about in talks is there's pressure to fit in, right? We put pressure on ourselves to fit in, particularly in an organization where there's lots of camaraderie, so you want to be, feeling that. But then actually, in some ways, that puts so much pressure on you to be like everyone else. And in the military, it was about like-minded people. And so I thought I had a disadvantage because I was different. But in many ways, there was even more pressure on the men to fit in because they had a very tight view of what an alpha male looked like, and you couldn't deviate from that. Whereas in some ways I had more freedom to deviate because they expected me to be different. Now, it took me a really long time to see that freedom that I had, and actually an opportunity. When we talk about inclusivity, we often assume it's people have got to be more inclusive towards women. But actually, I think women have got a tremendous advantage for a couple of reasons. One is, maybe we have got that feminine instinct or maternal instinct or whatever. And I think that can really help because today's leader is expected to be emotionally intelligent. And if women are slightly more comfortable talking about emotions, then they might find that they're more, they've got an advantage. But also because today's leader is expected to work in a cognitively diverse environment and work with people who aren't exactly like them. I've got 20 years experience doing that because I worked in a male-dominated environment. So all these women that have been in male-dominated environments, they know how to do this in the way that actually the male counterparts maybe don't have the same experience. So I think we can reframe this and go, yeah, okay, we were a minority, but that might just be exactly why women are going to be stepping up and doing more leadership roles. And I think the key is to work with what you've got and recognize when you've got, an advantage.
Yeah, that's great. It's our superpower.
That's true. That's true. So if you were to encapsulate what you're doing with Wellbeat and your speaking and all the things that you are doing right now. And when we think about Growth Enablement Madness, sometimes we speak to authors, of which you are. Sometimes we speak to tech folks. But how do you help the individuals, whether they are leaders or whether they are in a sales role? What are some of the things you work with them on so that they can be better at performing their job and doing their job?
Yeah, great question. And ultimately, this is how I work with people because I've, heard it commented that I reflect inwardly, even though I'm an extrovert in terms of, I come across as confident. Actually, I reflect inwards. And of course, there are people that naturally reflect more outwards and they're more we than me. So my style of coaching is more about starting with self-leadership. And also that does come from a background in mindfulness, because although mindfulness is training your brain, you start with your own brain, right? And what I love about this is that you can sort of get to understand your own brain, and then you've got a better understanding of how other people's brains work. Because although we're all wonderfully different, we're also all fundamentally human. So that's why I start with self-leadership and start to understand what our own hang-ups, fears, how we might get in our own way. And then you've got a really, really good starting point for leading a bit more intuitively and going, well, look, if I'm scared of that, maybe they are too. So what could I do to reduce the fear that they might be feeling around this? Or ask a question that might just delve a little deeper because they might not realize why they're resisting something. So this is where I start. I start with self-leadership, and I, kind of the mantra is understand yourself to understand others.
Yeah. The other thing that I heard when you spoke that really hit home for me was I'm a multitasker. And I came back trying to do what you suggested, which is the focus. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure thing. Yes. So we've probably all been brought up with this idea that we can multitask. I think it came about because of computers, when the first computers were literally switching from one task to another very quickly. And so it became this thing that, you put it on your CV, you would ask for people to be good at multitasking. Indeed, I thought that I could multitask, and I thought that I was being selected to fly because I could multitask. It turns out, however, that the concentrating part of the brain can only focus on one thing at a time. So think about when you're trying to listen into two conversations.
Yeah.
You cannot focus on two conversations at once. You've got to tune into one than the other. So that's multitasking. Really what you're doing is switching your focus. So if we kind of take that as a basic truism, then we realize that every time we switch focus, there's a penalty. It takes a finite amount of time for you to get into the groove. It's draining cognitive capacity, so it decreases our performance. And it's also stressful. So actually, what we want to do is focus on one thing at a time and be really intentional about what that thing is. So it's all about what we focus on. So let's make sure that what we focus on is worth our attention and energy. So that's the first thing, is we need to have a system where we can prioritize so that we feel confident going, that's the number one thing I'm focusing on right now. And a lot of us don't feel confident doing it because we felt like we could multitask, therefore we didn't have to prioritize. So number one is just prioritize, and you're better at it than you think already. Just start. And then the second one is, how do you stay focused? Because we are surrounded by distractions. Our own monkey brains like to wander off. And again, this is where I come back to mindfulness. Mindfulness is about training the brain to have your focus where you want it to be in that moment. So it's not about staying focused, it's about regaining focus. Every time you become distracted, that's an opportunity to go, oh, okay, I've been distracted. Now I'm bringing my attention back to the present moment. And that is literally what you do when you practice meditation. In the flying world, we had a hook, which was fly the aircraft. So we go, oh, I'm thinking about something else. That's not helpful. Fly the aircraft back in the moment. What does that mean for you in the work environment? Having like a hook so that when you get distracted, because it will happen, just a hook to remind yourself, right, back in the present moment, what do I need to focus on right now? And every time you do that, you are training your brain to have your focus where you want it to be. And over time, you will get better at it.
I think even the hook of fly the aircraft is applicable here. Now, maybe that's because I do have my small aircraft private pilot's license, because I do remember that training. But I think in any situation, you could use that as you're looking at your work and you're hearing other conversations. Hey, stop, fly the aircraft. I think you could use that to bring yourself back to focus. And, oftentimes I'm in focus and somebody will come up to me and say, hey, do you have a minute? And that distraction, you've had that, I'm sure.
Yes, absolutely. And that's another thing, that's another part of the training, because A, we're people pleasers. We don't like letting people down. And B, again, there's probably an expectation that if you're really good at your job, you can just drop what you're doing. So it's changing your mindset and going, actually, if I multitask now, I won't give you my best service. So it's better for both of us if we agree a time to come back to that. And that takes discipline. You need to have, trust and rapport to be able to do that. You might ruffle some feathers to start with before people realize that actually it's not helping them. So this is why it's difficult to do, because we don't like admitting that we're not immediately available to everyone all of the time. But again, the great news is that the brain is completely trainable. So we can train ourselves to do things that are uncomfortable. And in my experience, most people, if you explain why you're doing something, they go, oh, okay, so actually you really want to give this your full attention and you can't do that right now. And now I actually feel really valued that you're not just trying to do this in a 30-second gap. So, okay, let's talk about this later. So, a lot in there, isn't it? Because it is hard to do, but we can do it.
But I was serving up a tennis ball for you. What do you call those people?
Oh, bubble butts.
And why do you call them bubble butts?
We call them bubble butts. Yeah, you were serving up a tennis ball, because in the military, we had a mission bubble, basically. And that means that from your planning, your briefing, your flying, and your debriefing, that was your mission bubble. And everybody knew that you don't burst someone's mission bubble. But it's just life, isn't it? You're about to walk out to the aircraft, you're all kind of in the zone, and someone would always come up to you and go, I know you're in your bubble, but, and then they would ask you just completely ridiculous questions. So we used to call them bubble butts.
I thought that was very amusing.
Yeah.
So any other things you can do to train? It sounds like it's training almost. You've got to train.
It's all training. Whether it's, I guess there's two bits of training I'm touching on. One is focusing your attention or refocusing it. That's a really important thing to do to perform. But also training ourselves to do things which are uncomfortable. Because when we set the conditions in the workplace to be able to focus on one thing, that means being able to say no to people, and that's uncomfortable. So the mental skill required is to be able to do uncomfortable things, because our brain tells us, oh, it's uncomfortable, I can't do it. Incorrect. We can do it, we just don't like doing it. So it comes down to a willingness to train ourselves to do things which are uncomfortable without, of course, being a dick, because you can do both. You can be a nice person and still protect your boundaries. And again, these are all things I kind of learned subsequently through mindfulness, but realized we've done so much of this in the military because you spend so much time being uncomfortable, sat in a ditch, tired and hungry, and you realize being uncomfortable won't kill me. I can do this. It gives you a surprising confidence and a surprising resilience, so that when you need it, you can go, hey, I don't really want to have this conversation, but I know I can.
Speaking of confidence, I was on your website and I was going through your blog, and you had published an article recently around blind confidence. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was trying to be a bit provocative and hook people in, because I was actually at a women's leadership group, and the person leading it said, well, we all know that men have got blind confidence, which I thought was quite a brave assumption to make, given that there were no men in the audience. So how can we really test that theory? But I think certainly we have this idea that, men are more confident than women. So how do we get that? And we all want to feel confident, right? And I do think it does ultimately boil down to doing things that are uncomfortable and pushing yourself. So you're not freaking out, not really completely but just a little bit uncomfortable. If you push yourself out of your comfort zone every day, there's a few things that are happening. You're training your brain because of this thing called neuroplasticity. Every time you do that, essentially you create new neural pathways. And over time, you create a new core belief, which is, okay, I can do things that are uncomfortable. And when you have that belief, you feel more confident. So it does just boil down to just doing things that are a little bit scary and then living through them. And that's the other thing, is every time you do that and you live through it, which we all have clearly because we're still here, your brain goes, oh, it didn't kill me last time. So you're creating evidence for a new belief as well as actually creating that belief. And that's it. It's actually quite straightforward, but we've got to realize that our brain will resist things that are uncomfortable because we're still primitive animals, and we all think that uncomfortable things like fear is a sign that we're about to die. So it's not an intuitive thing to lean into discomfort, but when we do, we create great confidence from it.
You said neuroplasticity. Is that the word that we use?
Yeah.
I was more attracted to the monkey brain comment. So you know where I'm at. I was like, oh. Anyways, and that was my monkey sound. Well, this has been terrific having you on, and I'm so glad we got the chance to meet at SKO. You inspired me, and I hope you're inspiring the audience. And so let's just summarize some of the things. You're doing one-on-one coaching. Tell us again, what are you doing, and where can they find you? How can they get you for a speaking engagement? I know you want to come over to the United States more, so because you love Americans, and we're going to talk more about that later. But tell us how they find you, and tell us all the things you're going to do for them.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. So from the coaching point of view, actually, a great place to start is my book, because it's where I've kind of poured all of my best coaching into that. So, if you're the sort of person that likes to read things before deciding, then I would say that a great starting point is Fly Higher, the book, which is available on Amazon or Audible. Of course, you can do one-to-one coaching. And I'd say the easiest place to start is my website, which is sarahfurness.com. So you don't have to remember anything, just my name. That will take you through to my contact page. And it will also then mean that you can talk to me about workshops. So I do half-day and full-day workshops with groups of, up to 20 people. And also I do speaking engagements, which I absolutely love doing. And you can do all that. The first place to stop is probably sarahfurness.com.
Yeah, that's sarahfurness.com, sarahfurness.com. Sarah's email is sarah@sarahfurness.com. These are all the ways you can get a hold of her. We'll also post her LinkedIn and be able to get a hold of you that way. Big fan. Looking forward to seeing you more here in the U.S. I want to thank you very much for joining us today on the Growth Enablement Madness podcast. I also love this. I think you say this: fear is contagious, so is courage. Is that right? Is that one of your phrases?
Yes.
And isn't that the
It's
truth?
a good one. Yeah, that's really good.
Ain't that the truth? So let's be courageous, and everybody around you perhaps will get that feeling of courage. Thank you again for joining us. I want to thank our listeners. Growth Enablement Madness podcast can be found wherever podcasts are found: Spotify, Apple,
Google.
Google's, the Googles.
Anywhere you prefer to listen to podcasts, you can find our podcast.
Thank you very much. And Sarah, we'll talk again, I'm sure.
Brilliant. Absolute pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
Bye for now. Thank you for listening to this episode of Growth Enablement Madness podcast. I also want to thank Divinio Podcast for this episode's production and distribution. Finally, thank you to Sam Ward for our musical introduction and outro. Be sure to check out all of our episodes wherever you listen to your podcasts, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and more. New episodes are available monthly and cover all important topics for growing and scaling your business. Until next time, this is Jim Ward signing off. Let's grow.